The suitcase did not land in the hallway by accident. Evan Mitchell dragged it out of the bedroom Elena Moore had slept in since childhood, bumping it once against the doorframe before letting it fall hard onto the polished floor. The sound echoed through the house like a decision already made. He leaned against the doorway, arms loose, voice casual in a way that felt practiced. He told her she was a burden, that no one really wanted her there anymore. Madeline Cross, his wife, stood just behind him with her arms folded, eyes moving slowly across the room, measuring the walls and the bed like she was planning where new furniture would go. This was the same room Elena had moved back into 9 months earlier, after her mother's car accident nearly took her life. The room where Elena had worked remotely between medication alarms and physical therapy schedules. To Evan and Madeline, it was not history or sacrifice. It was space. Elena did not argue. She bent, gripped the suitcase handle, and rolled it past them without a word. That was the moment she stopped being convenient. Before I continue, I need to ask you a quick favor. We're working toward our first 1,000 subscribers, and your support truly makes a difference. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It's completely free. Like this video, and tell me where you're watching from. That single click helps this channel grow and allows me to keep bringing you stories like this. Elena Moore was 29 years old, financially independent, and exhausted in a way sleep never fixed. Since Margaret Lewis's accident, Elena had become the one who woke up at 2 in the morning when pain made her mother cry out. She tracked appointments, coordinated therapy, cooked meals soft enough to swallow on bad days, and still logged into work each morning at the small desk by the window. She paid her own bills and contributed where she could, but none of that mattered once Evan decided she was in the way. A few years earlier, Elena would have apologized just to keep the peace. She would have shrunk herself to fit wherever she was allowed. But standing in that hallway, with her suitcase pushed toward the stairs like an eviction notice, something inside her hardened. She was not leaving in shame. She was stepping back with purpose. If Evan and Madeline wanted control of the house, Elena would give them space, just enough rope to show who they really were. Looking back, the confrontation was not sudden. Evan and Madeline had been circling the house for weeks before the suitcase ever moved. They arrived often with takeout and forced smiles, speaking loudly about how hard city life had become. Evan lingered over the mail on the counter, flipping through envelopes marked from banks and insurance companies. Madeline wandered the hallway, opening cabinets under the guise of curiosity, making comments about prescription costs and coverage. Once, while Elena washed dishes, Madeline leaned against the counter and remarked how lucky Elena was to live rent-free. Elena calmly explained she paid her own expenses and covered therapy costs insurance did not. Madeline smiled without warmth, replying that having a safety net still counted. Evan made his comments quieter, always when their father Robert Lewis was out of earshot. He said Elena was almost 30 and needed to stand on her own feet. Elena swallowed her anger for her mother's sake, unaware that these visits were never about helping. The day everything surfaced began like any other. Elena guided Margaret through her physical therapy exercises in the living room, counting softly while her mother struggled to lift her leg. Sweat beaded at Margaret's temples, pain tightening her face. Elena kept her voice gentle, reminding her they could stop anytime. The front door opened loudly, Evan announcing they had brought lunch. He dropped paper bags onto the coffee table and said they needed to talk. His tone shifted, flat and businesslike. He explained that their condo situation was no longer working and moving back made sense, especially with Margaret's condition. Madeline added that using the bedroom closest to Margaret would make nighttime care easier. Margaret looked confused and said that was Elena's room. Evan shrugged and said it was temporary, suggesting Elena could move to a smaller room or find her own place nearby. When Elena objected, Evan's patience vanished. He told her she was not the hero she thought she was, just an obstacle. Elena did not raise her voice. She helped her mother finish therapy, cleaned the living room, and returned to the bedroom Evan had already claimed. Sitting on the bed, she allowed herself exactly 30 seconds to feel the sting before opening her laptop. That night, she booked a modest basement rental 10 minutes away. She was not disappearing, she was repositioning. When she told Margaret, she spoke calmly, promising she would still come daily. Before leaving, Elena suggested installing security cameras for safety. Robert agreed, relieved by the idea. While Evan and Madeline were out, Elena set up the cameras in shared spaces and synced them to her phone and her father's. Later, she logged into her parents' banking accounts, enabled alerts, and flagged every transaction. Evan had asked for access months earlier, claiming he was helping. Now Elena understood the risk. When Evan told her there were no hard feelings, she simply agreed. She drove away knowing distance was not surrender. It was preparation. The first night in the rental was quieter than Elena expected. There were no footsteps above her, no soft calls for help from down the hall, no familiar rhythm of the house settling around midnight. Just the hum of the small refrigerator and the glow of her laptop on the desk. She opened the security camera app and watched the living room feed. At first, everything looked ordinary. Margaret slept in her recliner. Robert moved between the kitchen and the hallway, tired but steady. Then the front door opened, and Evan and Madeline stepped inside, their voices low and urgent. Evan dumped a stack of mail onto the coffee table. Madeline walked straight toward the bedroom that used to be Elena's, already claiming it with her presence. Elena turned the volume up. Evan tore open an envelope and muttered that foreclosure was real this time. Madeline snapped that he promised he was handling it. Evan admitted he had lost his job months earlier and tried to gamble his way out. The words landed hard. This was not mismanagement. This was desperation. Madeline paced the living room, panic breaking through her polished exterior. She complained about sponsorships, image, and expectations, as if poverty were a personal humiliation rather than a consequence. Evan lowered his voice and said they still had options. He pointed out that his parents had equity and savings. Refinancing the house, opening a line of credit, temporary solutions, he claimed. Madeline hesitated, mentioning Elena's habit of checking statements. Evan answered without hesitation. That was why he needed Elena gone. If Margaret signed the paperwork herself, no one would question it. Elena's phone buzzed with an alert before he finished the sentence. A new credit application had been attempted under Margaret's name. It had been blocked, but the timing matched perfectly. Elena watched as Evan described waiting for Robert's long shifts, disguising documents as therapy billing. This was not a plan forming. It had already begun. Elena closed the app and grabbed her keys. Watching was no longer enough. If she hesitated, her mother's trust could cost them everything. Elena drove straight to the bank the next morning, her hands steady on the wheel. She asked to speak with fraud prevention, not a teller. Inside a small office, she laid out the facts without emotion. Her mother was recovering from a serious accident. Unauthorized credit attempts had been made in her name. She provided timestamps, alerts, and documentation. When asked, Elena acknowledged the person involved was her brother. The banker's expression tightened. Multiple inquiries had already raised internal concerns. Elena requested enhanced protections on every account, no loans, no credit changes without in-person verification from both parents. Notes were added. Alerts expanded. Before leaving, Elena was handed information on financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. From her car, she called the number listed on the pamphlet. The woman on the line listened carefully, then advised her to contact an attorney immediately. That afternoon, Elena sat across from Monica Reed, a lawyer with calm authority. Elena presented the footage, the banking records, and the alerts. Monica did not hesitate. This qualified as attempted financial exploitation. Monica explained the options clearly. Emergency guardianship over finances would create a legal barrier, preventing Evan from pushing paperwork through. It would not strip Margaret and Robert of dignity, it would protect them while the situation was investigated. Reports would also be filed with Adult Protective Services and local authorities. Evidence mattered. Timing mattered. Elena felt the weight of the decision but thought of her mother's unsteady hand hovering over a pen. She agreed. The petition was filed that day. Monica warned Elena not to confront Evan yet. Let him believe his plan was intact. On the way home, Elena bought a heavy folder and labeled it evidence. At the house, Evan's car was gone. Robert sat at the kitchen table, staring into cold coffee. Elena showed him the footage carefully, choosing moments that mattered. His disbelief turned into quiet rage. Margaret asked if it was real. Elena told her the truth. Together, they secured documents, changed passwords, and set up two-factor authentication. The house felt different by evening, less exposed, more guarded. Monica called to confirm the filings had been received and advised one final step. A family meeting. Evan needed to be confronted with witnesses and legal presence before he could adjust his story. Robert agreed, his voice heavy but resolved. The meeting was set for Saturday. When Evan and Madeline arrived, they were loud and relaxed until they noticed Monica seated beside Margaret. Evan asked what was going on. Robert told him to sit. Elena stood near the hallway, silent. When Evan dismissed it as drama, Elena turned on the television. The screen filled with frozen footage of Evan holding foreclosure mail. Color drained from his face. Monica explained the cameras were installed for safety, with consent.
Elena pressed play.
Evan's own voice described the plan, the debt, the reason Elena had to be removed. Madeline tried to interrupt, calling it brainstorming. Monica slid bank records onto the table. Evan accused Elena of betrayal.
Elena answered calmly. He had done this himself. A knock sounded at the door.
2 officers and a detective entered, responding to a report of suspected financial abuse. Evan's plan collapsed in real time. The detective spoke first, calm and direct, asking Evan about his access to his parents' accounts. Evan tried to explain, then tried to joke, then grew defensive as each answer led to another document placed on the table. The officer asked about the credit applications, the gambling sites tied to the home network, and the foreclosure notice already in motion. Evan's voice grew sharper as the room closed in on him. Madeline claimed she did not know the details, only that she trusted her husband.
The detective noted everything.
When Evan denied intent, Elena watched his own recorded words dismantle the lie. Finally, the officer told him he needed to come in for questioning regarding suspected financial exploitation. Evan protested, calling it help, not theft. The officer responded evenly that intent and pattern mattered. As Evan was led toward the door, he looked back at Elena, accusing her of destroying the family. Elena met his eyes and said nothing.
She did not need to. The truth had already spoken for her.
After the door closed, the house felt hollowed out. Madeline remained seated, stunned, until the detective handed her a card and told her she would be contacted. When she finally left, her heels clicked sharply against the pavement, fading into silence. Margaret trembled, tears streaking her cheeks, but her gaze was steady. Robert placed a hand on Elena's shoulder and apologized for not seeing the danger sooner. Elena told him it mattered that he believed her now. Monica gathered her papers and warned that the process was not over. There would be hearings and formal charges. Evidence would be reviewed. That night, Elena walked down the hallway and entered the bedroom Evan had tried to claim. She packed Madeline's half-unfolded bedding and boxes without anger, clearing the space carefully. Sitting on the bed, Elena felt exhaustion settle deep into her bones, but beneath it was something new. Stability. For the first time since the accident, the house belonged to the people who protected it. The months that followed moved slowly but decisively. Investigators uncovered more than Elena expected. Evan's gambling debts extended far beyond the foreclosure. There were unpaid loans from former co-workers and questionable financial arrangements tied to clients from his previous job. The pattern was clear enough for prosecutors to move forward. Evan accepted a plea deal rather than face a full trial. In court, he stood smaller than Elena remembered, wearing a suit that no longer fit his life. He pleaded guilty to financial fraud and exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The judge sentenced him to 10 years. Elena did not celebrate. She sat beside her parents, holding her mother's hand, feeling grief and relief intertwined. This was not justice that felt good. It was justice that felt necessary. The truth had ended something painful, but it had also prevented a greater loss that would have haunted them forever. Madeline's consequences arrived quietly. Creditors followed the trail the investigation exposed. The condo was officially lost. Sponsorships dissolved as brands distanced themselves from the scandal. Elena saw Madeline once months later, working behind the counter of a small cafe. They made brief eye contact before Madeline looked away. Elena felt no triumph, only closure. Life at home began to regain rhythm. Margaret's therapy progressed until she no longer needed the walker inside the house. Robert reduced his work hours without fear of sudden financial collapse. One Sunday afternoon, they packed sandwiches and visited the park for the first time since the accident. Margaret insisted on walking to the bench herself. Watching her sit in the sunlight, Elena realized how close they had come to losing everything. Silence would have been easier. Silence would have been ruin. Weeks later, a podcast requested to share Elena's story anonymously. She agreed, changing names and details, focusing not on punishment but on awareness. She spoke about how easily care can be mistaken for control and how often families excuse warning signs in the name of peace. Messages followed from strangers who recognized themselves in her story. At home, Elena stood in the doorway of her childhood room one evening, the space restored but no longer defining her. She understood now that leaving had never been abandonment. It had been strategy. Protection. Love with boundaries. She was no longer the convenient one, the quiet one, or the one expected to absorb harm. She had drawn a line when it mattered. And because of that, her parents were safe, their future intact. What she had done was not revenge.
It was the courage to say no when silence would have cost too much.
The legal process eventually faded into the background of daily life, no longer an emergency but a steady routine of updates and paperwork. Monica Reed handled the final hearings with precision, ensuring the financial guardianship was formalized and later scaled back once the danger passed. Margaret and Robert regained full control of their finances with new safeguards in place, wiser but not broken by what had happened. The house itself felt changed, as if the walls remembered who had tried to take from it and quietly rejected the attempt. Elena continued working remotely, no longer from a place of obligation but choice. She spent evenings cooking with her mother, listening to her father talk about work without the shadow of fear hanging over every bill. Trust was rebuilt slowly, honestly, with no pretending that things could go back to the way they were before.
They did not need to.
What came next was sturdier. Elena sometimes thought about Evan, not with longing, but with clarity. She accepted that the brother she believed she had was gone long before the suitcase hit the hallway floor. What remained was the truth of his choices, and she no longer carried responsibility for them. Forgiveness, she learned, did not require access. It did not mean reopening doors that had been closed for good reason.
It meant releasing herself from the guilt he had tried to place on her shoulders.
She focused instead on the life directly in front of her. Margaret's strength returned piece by piece.
Robert laughed more easily. The house no longer felt like a place Elena had to defend. It felt like home again.
Safety, she realized, was not about controlling everything.
It was about refusing to ignore what mattered.
The podcast episode continued to circulate quietly online. Elena never listened to it more than once.
She did not need to.
What mattered were the messages from people who recognized the warning signs too late or just in time.
Some thanked her for naming what they could not.
Others said they had checked bank statements for the first time in years. Elena responded when she could, always repeating the same advice. Pay attention. Ask questions. Do not confuse discomfort with wrongdoing. Silence protects the wrong person more often than it protects the peace. She never framed herself as brave.
She framed herself as awake.
Awareness, she believed, was the beginning of every boundary. On a quiet evening, Elena stood alone in the living room where everything had unraveled. The cameras were gone now, their job complete. The room looked ordinary again, but Elena knew better. She understood how easily ordinary spaces could become places of harm when people stopped paying attention. She also understood how powerful calm action could be. No shouting. No violence. No dramatic revenge. Just preparation, evidence, and the courage to act before it was too late. The suitcase was no longer a symbol of rejection. It was proof that walking away at the right moment could be the strongest move a person made. Elena's story ends without celebration, because real justice is quiet. It looks like a mother walking safely through her home, a father sleeping without fear, and a daughter who knows her worth does not depend on being convenient. The lesson is simple and uncomfortably true. Family does not excuse harm. Love does not require silence. And protecting yourself or the people who depend on you is never something to apologize for. If someone calls you a burden to make room for their own wrongdoing, believe what that moment reveals, and choose yourself anyway. Trust is a gift, not a blank check. Boundaries are not betrayal. And sometimes, the most meaningful victory is the refusal to let harm continue. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. Stories like this are created to remind us that self-respect, boundaries, and courage matter, especially when the hardest choices involve family. If this story spoke to you, you're welcome to subscribe to the channel. It's completely free, and it helps us continue sharing meaningful stories that carry real lessons. Until next time, remember this: protecting your peace is not selfish, and choosing yourself is sometimes the bravest thing you can do.